Kansas Ag Report. I'm Ken Rogers. On this week's program, we have our monthly conversation with Dr. Roger McEowen from the Washburn School of Law. We'll talk about his top 10 list of agriculture situations that worked its way through the judicial system, and maybe a couple that should have but didn't quite make the top 10. It also have features from the Kansas Soybean Commission, Kansas Department of Agriculture, and Kansas Grain Sorghum, and the weekly update from the Kansas Livestock Association, and market information from Pinion.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers. Kansas Farm Bureau, a grassroots ag organization representing the state's farm and ranch families since 1919, kfb.org. And the Kansas Wheat Commission, lending in the adoption of profitable innovations from wheat, online at kswheat.com.
Well, the recent cattle and feed report, called Neutral to Slightly Positive by Barrett Nelson, he's an economist at the American Farm Bureau. He said the overall rate of contraction in the U.S. cattle herd has slowed, but factors like demand, beef prices, trade, among other factors, influencing producers' decisions about what to do with their animals. He said cash prices for fed steers recently hit some record highs. While that's good for sellers, it's important to remember, he says, that they create obstacles for cattle buyers, can be a barrier for farmers who want to expand their herds. He also says this isn't a typical cattle cycle where high prices lead to growth in the U.S. herd. High cattle prices combined with the unpredictability of futures and the profitability could also compel farmers to continue marketing a higher percentage of females for beef rather than for breeding, which could continue the current contraction cycle. Well, U.S. farmers retained their post-election optimism outlook at the start of 2025 in the January Purdue University CME Group Ag Economy Barometer. That index rose 5 points above December to a number of 141. The barometer rise primarily attributed to a 9-point rise in the current condition index. The index of future expectations rose only 3 points in comparison. Compared to the previous surveys, fewer producers in January pointed to lower crop and livestock prices as a top concern. That helped explain why producers felt better about the current situation. The move in attitude was attributable in part to improvement in crop prices between December and January. Farmers remaining a little more optimistic about the current and the future of the current situation. The Farm Futures Expectation Index still numbers above the current condition. The Farm Financial Performance Index rose 14 points in January, a sign that producers expect this year to be better than 2024. And the Senate Ag Committee voted to advance Brooke Rollins to be the Secretary of Agriculture earlier this week in the evening meeting. Rollins should now be considered by the full U.S. Senate. Wheat grower CEO Chandler Gould said Brooke Rollins will be an outstanding Secretary of Agriculture, saying she's deeply committed to advocating for the country's producers and understand what rural America needs. He also said the wheat grower is encouraging the Senate to get her confirmed as quick as possible. Ranking Democrat Amy Klobuchar said she would support that nomination, but Democrats are worried about workforce, tariff, and conservation issues. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who is also a committee member, said he wants to bring up the nomination quickly, but also said the panel was full this week anyway, so hopefully in the coming week, groups like the Farm Bureau, Sugar Alliance, and others calling for a quick confirmation as well. You're watching the Kansas Ag Report. More coming up.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by Kansas Grain Sorghum, growers working together. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org. Grass and Grain, online or in the mail, keeping Kansas farmers informed for over 60 years. grassandgrain.com.
And welcome back. It's our monthly conversation with Dr. Roger McEowen from the Washburn School of Law, our annual part of the top 10 of what happened in 2024. And so, Dr. McEowen, glad to see you again in person. And before we get it, it's a very interesting list. And so before we get in this top 10, the ones you have in the not quite top 10, I thought were pretty big.
Well, they are big, and it's as I started this list, I started with 35 developments, and I had to winnow it down. And there are a few that you just can't cram them into the top 10, but they're worthy of mention. And I had three of those that I thought I needed to talk about, but still not quite in the top 10. And one of those had to do with the push in 2024 by USDA on funding for climate smart agricultural practices. In other words, trying to manipulate agricultural practices in a way that is deemed to be climate friendly. Now we'll see where all that goes with the new administration. It may go absolutely nowhere with the new administration. And then another one I had were the PFAS, and I can't pronounce the
Right.
whole name of that, but PFAS. Those are those compounds that don't break down. And there was a significant lawsuit filed about a farming operation in Michigan a couple of years ago, and then a big one last year down in North Carolina involving multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the provider of the biosolids that were spread on the farm, which wiped out the state came in and took soil samples and then basically shut them down. They can't sell livestock, can't sell their crops, so it's a big deal. The third one I had were the EID rules with
Yeah.
respect to the cattle industry. That's very controversial in the cattle industry, and those rules went into effect in November, but they're being challenged in court. So we're going to see that in 2020.
Okay, so those didn't make it. So let's just go to start with number 10 then on your list.
Number 10, I have state water compacts. There was a significant compact that was entered into between Colorado and New Mexico and Texas concerning water in the Rio Grande. And the case got all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the Constitution requires the Congress to give approval if the federal government has an interest that's involved. And there was, in that instance, a treaty that the U.S. has longstanding with Mexico with respect to water in the Rio Grande and some other federal interests there. So the court scrubbed what the states came up with and said, well, you can come up with a deal, but you got to run it through Congress to get approval. That's going to be a big issue out west. That's not that big of an issue here.
Right.
But out west. That's number 10.
Okay, what about number 9?
Number 9, the Bureau of Land Management came up with a public lands rule last year governing land in the western part of the United States, the federal lands out there. And it has a dramatic impact on ranchers' rights. And that's all I'll say about it. People can read my piece on it. But there are lawsuits that ranching interests have filed against that law. So that's going to continue to be a big one in 2025.
What about number 8?
Number 8, two takings cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, one down in Texas involving a state modification of a highway that ended up flooding this farmer out. The state said, well, you can't sue. Only the state can bring an action for a taking. And that got all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said, no, even though the Texas statute it doesn't say that it is self-executing, you can use Texas law and inverse condemnation to recover for those damages. Another takings case combined here in number 8 is out in California, and that is whether a traffic mitigation impact fee that a county was imposing on a homeowner to build a house in a rural area was constitutional or not. The court said no, that is not constitutional.
Number 7.
Number 7 was a Waters of the United States case out of Idaho, and this follows up on the Sackett opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court in 2023, and it involved the scope of what a wetland is that's subject to federal jurisdiction, and the ranchers largely won that case. It was a big development coming after the Sackett opinion in 23.
All right, 6.
These are the hobby loss rules in the tax code, and they are being challenged as unconstitutionally developed because of another development I'm going to talk about at number 2, which the Supreme Court reversed in 2024 that's now having an impact on IRS regulations. And so we'll see if the hobby loss regs will stand that challenge.
All right, we're going to take a break, have the top 5. When we return, look at the top 10 of the way Dr. McEowen sees things going through agriculture to our legal system that happened last year. We'll do that in just a moment.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Livestock Association, supporting members' business interests and meeting consumer demands. KLA.org. Oldie Seed Farms, carrying soil-specific seed. Find them on the web at oldieseed.com. That's OHLDE seed.com. And Kansas Corn, building the future at kansascorn.com.
And Dr. Roger McEowen from the Washburn School of Law is joining us, as he does every month. But this one, we're doing the top 10 from what happened in 2024. We're up to number 5.
Number 5, another U.S. Supreme Court opinion, and it's amazing how many of these developments get to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this last year was big, but this one is general, not just to agriculture, but to everybody that pays taxes. And that is, when do you realize income such that the government can tax it? And here you have a case where people invested in a small corporation that made tools for farmers, and they didn't receive any dividends. They didn't get any income from the corporation. All those earnings were just plowed back in, but yet the court said, yeah, we're going to attribute that income in a pass-through entity to you. You're taxed on it. Now, they put a footnote in there to tell Congress, don't get any wide ideas about a Senator Warren wealth tax or tax on appreciated value. We're not saying that, they said, but it's an interesting case on the policy front of taxation.
All right. These are amazing. They could all probably be number 1, I think. But anyway, let's go to number 4.
Number 4 is an EPA draft strategy with respect to herbicide application as it worked in with the Endangered Species Act. The reason this is a big deal in certain parts of the country, because nationwide you have a very large percentage, and in some instances over 90% of the habitat of endangered or threatened species is on private land. And so if we have the EPA coming in saying, well, you can't apply certain chemicals because this is habitat of an endangered or threatened species, that's going to hit a lot of privately owned farm and ranch land where the habitat might be. So that's a big one.
Number 3.
Number 3 are the beneficial ownership information reporting rules. This turned into a game of ping pong or badminton, whatever you want to call it, late in the year. These are these rules that require a business that's registered with a state to have to file an information return with the Financial Crimes Network, which is an arm of the Treasury, telling the federal government who owns the business above certain thresholds or who has substantial control. Well, those rules were challenged as unconstitutional. We had a court early in 24 that said they were, but did not impose a nationwide injunction. We then had, in early December, another federal court impose a nationwide injunction. Then it got all the way to the Supreme Court. That court flipped back and forth. It got under appeal to the Fifth Circuit. Fifth Circuit said no. Then they said, yeah, okay, the injunction's on. That got appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court took the injunction off, but said, well, in the meantime, there's been another federal district court case decided on a little bit different grounds. There's a nationwide injunction on that one. We're not ruling on that one. So as we speak right now, may be different by the time it airs.
Right.
There is no BOI reporting rule in place.
Yeah, that's been one that we've talked about a lot leading up to this point. Okay, so number 2 ties in with another one.
Well, number 2 is that repeal of Chevron deference, which I mentioned the hobby loss regs were being challenged as no longer constitutional because they were given Chevron deference when they were adopted. That's no longer there. Now, this is huge from an administrative law standpoint. And a lot of farmers do battle with administrative agencies, and you almost come in behind the 8 ball because you have to prove that the agency's interpretation of the statute at issue was arbitrary and capricious. And that's a very tough hurdle to overcome. That rule is gone. We have a lower deferential standard that is given to administrative agencies, and more of these decisions are going to be made by the courts. So that's going to be interesting how that plays out. That's a big development last year.
And number 1 probably is no surprise to anyone.
The fall 2024 election. That affects policy. As I wrote in one of my pieces on my Substack, had the Democrats won the House, the Senate, and the White House, we would expect the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to be discontinued, and there would be a massive tax increase for pretty much all taxpayers. That's not going to happen at this point in time. So the election, I would say for farmers right now, you have about 18 months of a pretty favorable environment. You have a Senate Majority Leader that's from South Dakota. He was put there by farmers and ranchers, obviously. And you have a majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and you have the Republicans in control of the White House, so it's one-party control. And what I tell farmers at meetings is make your ideas known, what you want, to your representatives, and because you maybe have a narrow window here where the stars have aligned as of right now.
Okay, there's a quick top 10 list of what happened in 2024 through Ag in the Courtroom, if you will, with Dr. McEowen from Washburn. How can folks learn all about this? There's other things too that you have.
Well, these are posted on my website, and I sent it over to Ag Manager at K-State, so it's accessible through Ag Manager, and then some of this shows up on my Substack too.
All right, very good. Dr. McEowen, as always, thanks so much. Talk to you next month.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Roger McEowen for the Washburn School of Law, Ag and Tax Law Specialist, joins us here monthly. We will take a break. Have more coming up in just a moment. Stay with us.
What if U.S. soybean meal were more than a commodity? If seed companies and the soybean checkoff built a better variety? That future is here. The time is now. To meet end-user demands, the soybean checkoff is investing in the compositional quality of soybeans, including meal. A message from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the soybean checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers.
U.S. soybean farmers depend on international markets. Over half of the soybeans grown on U.S. farms leave the country for markets abroad, and these U.S. soybeans transported internationally have built a reputation for quality. That positive reputation ensures market collaboration with those countries that seek quality and have the means to purchase it. Numerous international partners have long been in business with the U.S. Since the 1980s, Mexico has been a strong market for U.S. agriculture and now is the third largest agricultural export market for the U.S. Mexico is also the third largest soybean purchaser globally, which supports the country's poultry, egg, and pork production. According to the U.S. Soybean Export Council, 88% of Mexico's soybean imports are from the U.S. Identified challenges for the Mexico market include its government regulations on other genetically modified crops, competition from other vegetable oils, and an increasing domestic crushing capacity that could dampen import demand. Japan immediately follows Mexico on the list of top U.S. soybean purchasers. According to USEC, the country prefers the quality and stability of U.S. soy and gives the U.S. a 53% share of soybean imports. The U.S. Soy Sustainability Assurance Protocol holds a high value for the Japanese market as well. China continues to be the #1 customer of U.S. soy, importing just over half of the U.S. exports. It's also the #1 customer of Brazilian soybeans. China holds a 60% share of global soybean imports, meaning it greatly influences global soybean trade. While the U.S. Soy Sustainability Assurance and long-standing collaboration with China keeps market access open, Brazil's emergence as a dominant soybean market challenges opportunities for U.S. soy. The U.S. continues to mitigate potential market share losses by seeking other emerging opportunities for soybean exports. Our next segment on the Kansas Ag Report covers those markets. In the meantime, learn more about the global soybean market at ussec.org.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.
This Kansas Grain Sorghum Update features Sorghum Commissioner Kevin Kniebel, who represents USDA's East Central District 8 of the state.
I farm not too far from Manhattan, Kansas, to the south in Morris County. We have about 450 acres of milo usually per year. You know, it's a great crop to spread out our planting. The excitement to me, being an ag producer, is the ability to develop new ways to enhance soil health and make sure that the farm is passed on from generation to generation for years to come.
Kevin also has an eye on New Horizons, representing farmers by helping to steer sorghum research at Kansas State University.
It's been several years ago that I got asked to join the commission. You get to see where a lot of your checkoff dollars go and the reason behind that, and you have the opportunity to have input in that process. I was also asked to serve on the CSIP board. CSIP is the Center for Sorghum Improvement, and they do a great job of promoting research and development for things that impact the farmer. Some of the things that I've had the opportunity to witness is the technology being utilized for the sugarcane aphid. There's a marker now for that, and it's in the mainstream. It's out in the market. The opportunity for sorghum going forward is pretty exciting. You know, we have these good markets right now, but with the research that we have and these technologies coming on board, there is going to be more opportunity for sorghum than even in the past.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
The Kansas legislative session is now underway as the state's senators and representatives are convening in committees and as large bodies to hear bills and debate issues that affect the lives of Kansans. This is a busy season for the Kansas Department of Agriculture as we monitor any legislation that would have an impact on farmers, ranchers, or agribusinesses in Kansas. We are often asked to provide background information or testimony on bills that relate to conservation, water, animal health, or other topics of great importance to Kansans. At the start of the legislative session, Secretary of Agriculture Mike Beam meets with the Ag Committees to provide an annual State of Agriculture report, an update on the ag industry, along with the work that KDA has been involved in throughout the past year. In addition, KDA frequently proposes legislation that amends statutes which govern the agriculture industry, so that the state law is current and comprehensible for citizens who are affected by those laws. Often this involves making statutory changes to ensure consistency, reflect current practices, clarify terms and authorities, and provide flexibility where appropriate. Sometimes it also involves changes to fee structures to allow the agency to fund the work of the divisions and programs through user fees. This year we'll be talking about updates to water structures inspections, weights and measures updates, some water conservation issues, and the Kansas Pet Animal Act, among other topics. If you're interested in following along with the 2025 Kansas legislative session, go to kslegislature.org, where you'll find information about legislators, committees, bills, and much more. Most of the committee meetings and hearings are streamed live there and on the legislature's YouTube channel. And please reach out to us at the Kansas Department of Agriculture if you have any concerns or questions about any of the ag-related issues that arise this year.
More farmers and ranchers than ever have chosen to be BQA certified.
Josh Mueller of Halstead has been appointed Vice Chair of the Kansas Beef Council. He, along with Chairman Jake Panbacker from Washington, will lead the council over the next year. Mueller is a fourth-generation farmer and rancher. In 2019, he and his wife, Macy, purchased El Dorado Livestock Auction, where they currently market nearly 70,000 head of cattle each year. He has been a representative for Superior Livestock Auction for 20 years and also has his own order buying business. Mueller currently serves on the Federation of State Beef Councils and has been a member of the Kansas Beef Council Executive Committee since 2018. He is a past Kansas Livestock Association County Chair and past President of the Harvey County Livestock Association. He and Macy have 4 children. Additionally, 3 new members were appointed to serve on the Kansas Beef Council Executive Committee. The new members include Natalie Hoagland from Leavenworth, Brooke Johnson of Tribune, and Andy Larson from Randolph. They joined 23 other cattle producers from across the state. The committee represents a cross-section of Kansas cattlemen and women who volunteer their time to determine how checkoff funds are invested. Their collaborative efforts ensure the state remains a leader in beef promotion, both domestically and internationally.
Hello and welcome. Tanner Burning with Pinion Risk Management, giving you a commodity market update for the week of January 13th, 2025. Grain bulls have re-entered the chat this week following last week's USDA supply and demand and stocks report. This comes out a week post-report, but let's review the important numbers and touch base on how that moved markets. The January USDA report is known for giving us some fireworks, as it is usually the USDA's first major adjustment to estimated yield in 2024. Focusing first on the USDA estimates of yield for corn and soybeans in the U.S. For corn, prior estimate was 183.1 bushel to the acre. The report came in with a reduction of 3.8 bushels to the acre, equivalent to nearly 315 million bushels of corn, based the harvested estimate gone off the balance sheet. Soybeans also saw a reduced yield, with the prior estimate of 51.7 bushel to the acre down to 50.7, a round number of 1 bushel to the acre less, or nearly 86 million bushels of soybeans gone from the production balance sheet. The yield reduction was the first domino to fall, leading to lower production and lower carryout across the U.S. Carryout is what we will discuss next. Last spring, we began the effective corn crop year, after planting with an anticipated 2.1 billion bushel carryout for corn. The January report shows that number down to 1.5, or a 600 million bushel difference between April to January 25. This transitions us from a burdensome type supply to a more manageable, ample supply environment. And that is what has the bulls ready to run if nearby weather reduces the supply in South America, or a demand-driven rally comes on with the new incoming administration. So what is coming up next? On Monday, January 20th, President-elect Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Global currency markets have been preparing for this, as the U.S. dollar index has been on an absolute tear since Election Day, appreciating almost 10% and not cooling off anytime soon. With believed tariffs, as they will affect trade relations, and with global companies looking to buy the dollar versus other exchanges on a more tax advantageous plan under Trump. Back to the ag sector, on the front side of this, it seems very bearish for trade and export, so a lot is going on in regards to the new administration and these USDA reports supplied last week. Livestock markets have been the darling of the trade through November and December. They've stabilized and momentarily taken a backseat to the grains through these headlines and report-based stories. But fundamentals remain strong for cattle, and we're coming off or near all-time highs looking out into 2025. This could be worth capturing some profit via an LRP product or use of risk management if an event corrects our current course for new highs. When it comes to following the day-to-day moves in ever-changing agricultural markets, we at Pinion Risk Management look to be a trusted source of information for our clients, along with being a guiding hand on decision-making and reasoning towards a market plan. To learn more about our approach for risk management, please give us a call at 888-452-8751. I'm Tanner Burning with Pinion, and thank you for your time.
What does a brighter, more sustainable future look like in our cities and towns, and how do we get there? When New York needed an alternative fuel source to reduce carbon emissions, the city found what it needed in biodiesel made from U.S. soybean oil.
That's our close this week. Be social with us online, KansasAgReport.net, or our social media channels. I'm Ken Rogers. We'll be back with you next week for another Kansas Ag Report. See you then.